We have 4.9 million registered voters in Los Angeles County, largest local election jurisdiction in the country. And elections by their nature are public process and rely on grassroots support through poll workers, community locations to host the polling places on election day, all of those things. So I think we've been on a good path towards voter education and outreach, and also preparing to migrate to hopefully a more modernized voting system. But that's also been during a period of regulatory instability, both at the state and the federal level, and a period of economic issues that meant that there weren't the resources available necessarily to fund the elections process. So sadly, we work in an environment where when there's a crisis is when the resources are made available to address the issue. I mean, and that's the history with elections. If you go back to 2000 in the Bush v. Gore election, the reaction was for Congress to appropriate a lot of money to replace punch card voting systems. That happened relatively fast around the country for legitimate and well-intentioned reasons. That money was spent relatively quickly on new equipment that now we can look back on and say wasn't necessarily ready for prime time. Wasn't designed with the voter in mind. It was designed with a market interest and kind of a quick shift in time to try and address what happened in the 2000 election. And I think in retrospect, I think what we know is that the punch card system was a symptom to what happened in 2000, but it wasn't the entire issue. So I think the last 8 to 10 years have really been about really looking at the elections process to identify, who does it serve, what are the resources available to address those concerns going forward, and how do we kind of achieve a level of stability as elections administrators in a time where the process, the nuts and bolts of how elections are run have become part and parcel to the partisan campaigning process. And people have learned how to use questioning the election administration process as a way to question the outcome of an election. And it's just a new world since that happened.
Yeah. So one of the things a lot of people pay attention to is a lot of people don't realize that people vote completely differently all across the country. What can you tell us about how we vote in LA and why we've stuck with that?
Yeah, so a couple things come to mind on that. I guess here in LA, to start with, we still vote on a voting system that essentially was first rolled out in 1968 in the presidential election that year when punch card voting was first introduced here in LA County. Now that system's been modified over the years. After Bush v. Gore, it was modified to an optical scan system. But as far as the voter experience, when the voter walks into a polling place, they still use a vote recorder device that was designed for the punch card, but instead of punching holes through the ballot, they're using an inking device that fills in that bubble with ink. Those ballots all come back here to our headquarters centrally and are tabulated here. There have also been the addition of a precinct ballot reader that allows for the voter to have their ballot scanned at the polling place to alert them if it's blank, if the ink didn't come through, or if they overvoted on a particular contest, to give them the opportunity to correct that before they leave the polling place. And the addition of an audio ballot booth to provide for accessible voting options for voters with disabilities to vote independently and without the assistance of another person. But as you point out, I think we're one of 2 jurisdictions in the country that use a system of this nature. And part of the reason for that is because of our size and complexity. There really has been, since 2000 and 2004, the market of voting systems has shrunk in the country. It hasn't got larger, it's actually shrunk. There's been public concern about the integrity of the equipment that's used for voting, especially voting systems that were introduced that did not have a paper auditable ballot, and our system does have that. And we also are required in LA County to provide our voting materials in 9 different languages other than English under the Voting Rights Act. Very few jurisdictions that have that issue. The advantage of our current system, which is a pretty solid system, and it's served us well in terms of accuracy and productivity. The advantage of it is it's a small form ballot. You can get 3 million ballots back here to our headquarters and count them on election night and have election results to report, which of course is important to the electorate, to the media, and to the candidates. The disadvantages or concerns are that it's dated technology. The hardware that's used isn't made anymore. It's been retrofitted. It's not particularly intuitive from a interactive standpoint. If you're a vote by mail voter, you're having to look at a guide and then fill in the corresponding number. There are new, more modern ways to do that are much more intuitive. So those are the issues we've been working towards. Is what we want to be sure, and fortunately, we're one of the few jurisdictions in the country where we still have some of that federal money available. And we want to be sure, though, that when we invest that money, that we invest it in a system that does offer a better voting experience and that has the ability, as other systems do today, to adapt and change with regulatory changes as well as voter behavior changes. So instead of locking us into a system that if there's a law change 2 years from now that we have to scrap it and start all over, we want to be sure that we have the ability to adapt to that. So that's what we've been working towards.
Okay. And you mentioned the number about how many people do you think will be voting in this primary?
That's a great question. This primary is unique in a lot of respects. I mean, I've been working in elections administration for 25 plus years, and this is a whole new primary cycle, and it's bringing a lot of new people into the process. So that's a good thing. Hopefully, they'll actually show up and vote. Typically, in primaries in LA County, we have remarkably low turnout. So in non-competitive presidential years, it can be as low as 20-some%. In our higher active years, still only around 51%, I think, has been high. This may be an exception to that. I think it's predicting turnout is sort of like looking into a crystal ball. So I'm hesitant to give a specific number, because then people ask, well, how did you come up with that? And if you didn't meet it, where did those ballots go and all that? So I don't make specific turnout predictions. I leave that to the people who are doing polling and all of that. I will say that all indications of the activity leading up to this election indicate that we're going to see higher than usual turnout and quite possibly record turnout for a primary. Now, again, as we get closer to the election, the dynamics of the presidential contest and the nominees has changed. So that may have a dampening effect on what we saw as a surge in turnout. But that said, even since the Indiana primary, we continue to see voter registration activity going up. We continue to see a lot of vote by mail activity. So I still feel pretty confident that we're going to have higher than usual turnout.
So you have to be prepared for about at least 3 million voters, you'd say?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, that's about at least how many things are going to come through the door that night.
I think we have to be prepared for that, one way or the other.
Okay.
Right, yeah.
And then you mentioned vote by mail, California, that's becoming increasingly popular. What can you tell me about how the vote by mail process works, how people can be confident that ballot is safe and secure, and sort of the future?
Sure. I think the most important thing for people to know about vote by mail is that the voter has the most capacity to ensure the security of their ballot, and a lot of that comes to how the voter deals with their ballot. So we have about a third of the voters in LA County who are permanent vote by mail voters. Typically, about a third of the turnout in any given election is by mail. So what I mean by that is that the voter decides how they're going to return that ballot, whether they're going to send it in the mail, whether they're going to drop it off at a polling place, whether they're going to give it to a family member to drop off. And we always hear stories about, the speculation that there are people out there canvassing, picking up the ballots and all that. And I always like to remind people, that there are only two places to put a voted ballot, in a mailbox or a ballot box. And voters should know their rights and responsibilities in that process. Now, the validation of a vote by mail ballot, just like at the polling place where you sign a roster attesting to your qualifications to be a voter, on a vote by mail ballot, you sign an affidavit on the outside of that envelope.
Right.
The signature on that envelope is checked, is compared to the signature on your voter registration record before that ballot is processed. So, and that's all done in a transparent manner. People can come here and observe that process. So it really is, it's a convenient and secure way to vote that works for a lot of voters. It's not the solution for every voter,
Right.
but it certainly helps a good percentage of our voters.
And because we have, well, you could tell me this. California has a very high number of registered independents. I think upwards of 40 at some point. Is that about right?
No party preference voters?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, and that's actually, interestingly, the fastest growing party selection on registration is voters who are choosing not to make a party selection when they register.
And so tell me what how these non-party preference voters can participate on primary day.
Right. So this is actually one of the reasons why presidential primaries are the most complex elections that we administer in California, because they have a whole different set of rules. Since we've moved to the top two primary system for our state primaries, for new voters, they've never experienced this before. That in this primary, for the presidential contest, your ballot is going to be determined by how you registered to vote and which party you selected. So voters who did not select a party, no party preference voters, won't see the presidential contest on their ballot. So then at the next level, though, the parties have different rules. So the Republican Party, for instance, as well as the Green Party and the Peace and Freedom parties have what's called a closed primary, which means they do not allow anyone to vote for their presidential candidates other than voters registered with their party. Contrast that to the Democratic, American Independent, and Libertarian Party, who have a modified open primary that allows for no party preference voters to cross over and participate in their primary. But the voter has to affirmatively request that and indicate that they're requesting to vote in that primary. So what that looks like for voters, if you're a vote by mail voter, we sent you a postcard back in March kind of giving you those parameters and said, if you want to cross over, let us know. We understand that's in a pile of mail, and in March you're probably not thinking about voting in June. So if you've received a no party preference ballot in the mail and you want to cross over for one of those parties, you can still do that. You can contact us, make a new request, and declare which party you want. Or you can go to your polling place on election day, surrender that vote by mail ballot, and cross over. If you're a poll voter on election day, when you go in to sign that roster, the poll workers are instructed, when they see that you're a no party preference voter, to go over the choices with you and allow you to make the choice of which ballot you want to vote.
That's good to know. And then you mentioned the open primary. There's been a lot of people sort of talking about open primary, closed primary. Can you explain what that is? Because I'm not sure a lot of people understand what our recent reality is with the open primary system here in California.
Right, so that's why I guess maybe the best way to explain that is that the June 7th election is really two elections in one. It's a presidential primary, and for the presidential contest, you're voting a ballot that is party specific. The rest of the ballot, though, because California adopted what's referred to as the top two primary system, means that voters get all of the candidates on the ballot, and the results of the primary will narrow that down to two candidates per contest that will appear on the November ballot. So again, at the top of your ballot, you're going to see a single party contest for president. But then when you go to the next page for U.S. Senate, you're going to see candidates of all of the parties, and you can jump around at your discretion through the rest of the ballot. And then the top two vote getters regardless of party. So you could have contests where there are two Democrats who proceed to the general election, or two Republicans that proceed to the general election, depending on the demographics and the political culture of a particular district. So it does make this particular primary every 4 years rather complex.
And if people are concerned, if they see problems, what should they do before Election Day or on Election Day?
Yeah, I think our philosophy here in LA County is sort of to steal the line of TSA and say if you see something, say something. So if you have first and foremost, if you have a question, it is confusing and people don't vote every day. So don't be shy about asking a question. We have a number of resources on our website. We have a 1-800 number for voters. That's what we're here for, is to ensure that voters have a good experience. On election day, same thing. If you're seeing something that seems out of place, has a question, let us know that. Oftentimes, the earlier we know about something, the better we can address it and the better we can explain it. I think we live in an age of social media and and because of the politicizing of the elections process, I think there is a tendency to, quickly post something on Twitter or Facebook, which is fine. I mean, that's certainly appropriate. There's value in that. But take that extra step to let us know too, because we can in most cases address that. And if there is something, we can at least squelch it early in the process before it becomes a bigger issue.
Okay, great. Well, thank you very much for the work you're doing, and I hope to be able to keep up with you on Election Day so that if you might be able to give us updates or help clarify something in that kind of manner. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate your interest in the elections process. That this kind of coverage and dialogue actually helps us in terms of making sure voters know what to expect as well.
Yeah, we all need that. So
Yeah.
thanks a lot.
Thank you.